in terms of sort of the past season or so, I mean, 2019-20, that was the relegation from the Premier League. But I think the general consensus was that, this was a well-run club. This was a club who had, I mean, looking from a purely financial perspective, lots of saleable assets. The Todd Cantwells, I think I saw a new transfer linked to him every week in the close season following that relegation. But the Timu Puki, Emi Buendia, Max Aarons, Todd Cantwell, the club managed to maintain them, to retain them, sorry. Was immediate bounce back a foregone conclusion, or, from sort of your granular view, your granular approach of it, was it less of a foregone conclusion and more of a, well, we're going to have to get this right if we're going to have to pull off what our intention was when we came down?
Yeah, I think I remember distinctly that I went into the start of this season thinking that I was prepared to give them a degree of leeway with how the previous season had ended, because they were so clear on what they were having to do. But to give them the leeway of just how bad it got at the end of the Premier League season meant that the expectation had to really be on them come the start of this year. I remember saying, someone asked me, "Oh, where do you think Norwich will finish?" I was like, "Well, they should win it." And normally I wouldn't be as bold as that, but it was literally, look at the squad, and they still had Ben Godfrey at that point, but you kind of anticipated that he would probably go. So I think there was sort of for me personally, professionally as well, they needed that pressure on them because of what they'd been allowed the previous year. I think COVID, in a way, the financial implications of that, again, part of the reason why I felt so confident in what they should go on to achieve was because there was so much instability everywhere, and a lot of it, and it's kind of the similar this window as well. You can look at those players and think they're great talents, high value, really important to Norwich, but it's so much about who comes in to buy them. And although there was a lot of speculation, there was never really much concrete interest. I think when you look at Max Aarons and what you're dealing with is an approach from Barcelona to loan him without any obligation to buy him at the end of it, you're like, well, has anyone got any money here? What is anyone doing? And so it flipped maybe more towards the end of that window for me of not whether they were going to go, but what state these players would be in their minds once the window had closed. Because it was literally no point having Todd Cantwell and Emi Buendia, particularly, going into October and November if their heads weren't in it and they're like, I really don't want to be here. Because then you can be any kind of great player, but if you've not got your head in it, you're not going to contribute properly. And then that would have then become a major issue. And I think you've seen from just what they've contributed for the rest of the season, those players got their heads around it themselves, which is a brilliant achievement for those guys. Daniel Farke managed the situation incredibly well, given a lot of people were kind of doubting it when he was saying he'd rather play the kit man in September than these players if their heads weren't right. And he literally was dropping them from his squad, which people felt that bridges were being burned in terms of supporters. They were were really wary of the situation. And so from that point on, once it was clear that they could get their heads together, I wasn't really worried about January because it felt like the momentum would carry them through by that point. But that was probably the biggest difficulty. But they were handed an advantage in the way that it was difficult to see who would buy these guys for the money that Norwich probably still wanted to pay or to receive for them. And the ones who did go kind of envisaged they would lead. I felt like they would be reasonably happy to let Jamal Lewis go. And, it was almost relatively cheap for sort of 15 to 18 million quid. And whether it's the right option for him in Newcastle is a difficult one. I think with Ben Godfrey, I think that was spot on. And, Norwich got their record fee, which was 25 million quid with add-on, including the add-on sort of as a package. But Everton fans would probably now, although Everton were trying to sort of suggest it was less, I think they would just now look at it and go, 25 million quid for him, the bonus. And I think a lot of people here at Norwich were saying, well, that's great value. And in fact, some people were a little bit disappointed at the time that it was maybe not a bit more. So Norwich had to balance that. But in signing Ben Gibson, they probably had a more rounded, complete defender, just with less potential. Ben Godfrey will end up being a better player probably than Ben Gibson, but Norwich's defence improved by recruiting Ben Gibson. Hopefully I've said the right Bens in the right places there. It gets confusing.
No, I know where you're coming from. I mean, the sales of Jamal Lewis and Ben Godfrey in particular, that raises sort of £40 million. And I think, what we've seen in the past few years in the Championship with the likes of Leeds and Aston Villa being promoted whilst making quite hefty losses, 40 million essentially allows you to be competitive. It allows you to retain those key players on Premier League wages essentially, or sort of bottom half Premier League wages, and it just gives you that little bit of buoyancy, I think, which has probably been quite important to keeping this squad together, who have clearly had their heads in it all game, all season.